Hi, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Weathering the Storm, How to Reduce IT Costs During COVID-19, and hopefully for the long term as well. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Mark Lee. I'm Business Development Director with GCI Nasstar, and we're the UK's largest independent IT services provider. I've been involved in IT and software services probably for about 30 years, and I can definitely say that we've never ever experienced anything quite like this. We've seen periods of rapid growth, recessions, but nothing that's tested us in the way COVID is at the moment, as I'm sure you all know. I blogged a few weeks ago about how businesses not directly involved in the fight against COVID-19 might play their part, really by adapting to the situation and keeping things going as much as we all possibly can. And you know, since then, things like home working, Zoom meetings have become the norm. We've all had to innovate and be flexible. And in most cases, unfortunately, we've all had to adapt to declining revenues as well, as the lockdown has really started to bite and constrain economic activity. Well, today I'm going to try to give you a few practical suggestions of ways that you might be able to reduce some of your IT costs, in some cases quite quickly, to do what we can to help you, and what you can really, to help you weather the storm that we're all going through at the moment. I'm going to cover about 9 different areas where you might be able to make savings, with 2 or 3 points in each area. So there's quite a lot to go through, so we should get started. By the way, you can submit any questions that you have as we go through the chat window that you should all have on your screens. And if time allows at the end, I will try to answer as many of them as I can. If we don't get through them all or time runs out, then we can come back to you directly later with answers. And by the way, the cost saving ideas that I'm going to run through, they're not in any particular order. So if you can stick around for the full session, it might be that, you know, an idea that really works for you could be at the end of the session. So if you can stick around for all of it, please do. But I know we've all got busy days despite what's going on, so no offense if you can't. So let's get going. So the first cost saving idea, and actually I thought I put this slide deck together a couple of days ago, and reading the news, I was thinking probably have to delete this one, given that the furlough scheme was starting to come towards to end, or at least we thought so. But with yesterday's announcement from Rishi Sunak, perhaps, you know, this has still got some shelf life in it yet. So tip number 1, if you furloughed your people, some of your people, make sure you furlough their IT as well. The government's furlough scheme, you know, it's helping to support individuals and businesses through this crisis, and hopefully it's going to protect jobs on the other side. But don't forget, if you're furloughing people, furlough what you can of their IT costs. But if you're doing that, don't forget to ensure service continuity so that when they get back from furlough, you know, their email's still there, for example. So back up their email boxes, divert their inbound email to colleagues who are not furloughed, or to a resource mailbox like sales enquiries or whatever it might be, so that if you are getting important inbound emails to people that are furloughed and you've switched off their email, for example, to save some money, then you're not going to miss those emails. Actually, backing up Office 365 mailboxes, for example, is actually probably a pretty good long-term strategy anyway. So you might want to continue with this particular tip about backing up software for the long term. It's perhaps not a cost-saving tip, at least not directly, but you never know how valuable being able to recover something that got deleted in an error might be. So immediate cost-saving, furlough the software, but maybe also think about backing up your mailboxes for the long term. At GCI, we've developed a standardized approach to helping customers furlough their IT costs, and we launched that at the start of March. So, and there's a little case study you can see on the screen at the moment. What we do is we use our private cloud storage infrastructure to back up the mailboxes of furloughed users, and we divert their inbound mail, as I said a minute ago or so ago. And if you do that, here's an example. So this is one of our customers, which is a leisure sector customer. Obviously, leisure sector is particularly hard hit at the moment, and they furloughed about 84 of their people. And those 84 people have Microsoft E5 licenses, and they were costing them £38 a month. So we've switched those licenses off. We've taken the other measures I've talked about, and that's giving them a saving of over £3,000 a month by not paying for software essentially that they're not able to use at the moment anyway. The cost for us backing up and storing all of their mailboxes is just £1 a month for each of them. So there's a little bit of cost and there's some project fees to set it all up. But even so, this particular customer, in the first 3 months of that furlough, they're looking at a saving of close to £9,000 on one software application alone. And talking to their IT director last week, he was telling me that there's a number of other pieces of pay-as-you-use software that they also have that they've also furloughed, so their savings are actually quite a bit higher than that. So tip number one. Number two, take advantage of promotional offers. There are lots of special deals that have been launched in the last 4 or 5, even 6 weeks now from the tech majors. People like Microsoft are offering, they were initially offering actually completely free use of some of these services for 6 months without any commitment. They varied the conditions of those special offers last week. So right now, these are just a few examples. There are similar offers from some of the other software vendors as well. But from Microsoft, they're offering 6 months free use of Office 365 E1 licenses. And also business basic licenses for smaller businesses. And now they're both quite interesting. And we're going to come back and talk about why in a slide or two time, because E1 licenses and business basic licenses also give you access to Microsoft Teams. And there's some other big saving potential around Teams. We'll come to that in a few minutes' time. So tip 3, simplify your user's IT environment. So one of the things that's definitely happened and really taken off in the last few weeks is video conferencing, as people are working from home, conducting meetings using Zoom or WebEx, whatever, lots of different tools out there, and and they're all great. But how much time do your users waste the first time in particular that they try downloading and working with these different VC applications? I've done it myself. I receive a meeting invite at the last minute. I remember my calendar flashes up. I click on the meeting and I realize quite quickly that it's using a system I've not used before. So I have to go through that process of downloading an applet or something so I can join the meeting, and eventually I join and I make my apologies. I'm sure we've all, at least most of us, have had the same experience. Well, you can avoid that now because lots of the video conferencing applications, and Teams that I mentioned earlier is one of them, have built within them connectors to lots of the other video conferencing applications, including in the case of Teams, Zoom and WebEx. So you've probably got the 3 most commonly used video conferencing services, all accessible through Teams. So what that means is that your users, rather than having to download all these different applets, can just use one familiar interface, say Teams, that they know. So there's no time wasted, but also there's the reduction probably in the support overhead that you might have to back them up with. So that's one thing to look at. Another thing, it's what probably was technology that people were thinking had its day, but virtual desktops could have a big part to play in simplifying user IT environment, particularly for home working. So you can get much greater control, standard builds, again, lowers your support overhead, but it also delivers better application performance, particularly if you've got on-premise applications that you're hosting, people from home are using them, they're not really engineered for remote use. Well, you can compress them, run them on virtual desktops and give a better user experience and save yourself some money around the complexity of supporting it. these are just a couple of examples. There's lots of ways you can simplify your IT environment. So there's two pieces of thinking. I suggest you think more about that and see where else you might be able to make things simpler and therefore cheaper for your users and for your business. Tip 4, check that your software licensing model is optimal for your business. And this might have changed in the new environment. You might have different usage patterns. You've probably got much more variability around the number of users as things like furlough kick in, as we talked about before. And one of the ways that you can be much more flexible going forward and optimize your software environment is to think about and start to make use, if you're not already, of more pay-as-you-go, pay-as-you-use type software services rather than buying perpetual licenses on application packages. So it will give you, if you can do that, it can give you some cash flow benefits, obviously, because you're not paying a big upfront bill for software, you're paying for it as you go. So smaller monthly charges rather than big upfront charges, but you're also only paying for what you're using. So if you are furloughing people or even making redundancies and downsizing the business through the period, then again, there are some good savings that you can access potentially by moving to this kind of pay-as-you-use sorted model. If you are using pay-as-you-use software, and it's some of the software that you might use, it's incumbent on you to report your usage to the vendor. Well, if you're doing that and you're already using these sorts of software, it might be worth just checking that your reports are accurate and you're not actually paying for more licenses than you're using. So a couple of areas there around software licensing where you can optimize it and just make sure that you are getting good value and not paying for things that you're not using. It can be quite a complicated area. If you need to take expert advice on this, then do. People like GCI, we can help, or there's lots of other providers out there who can give you some good advice on and look at your software usage patterns, look at the options that are available and help you to optimize the way in which you procure and use your software. Number 5, look for opportunity to sweat your existing investments harder. And you might actually have some quick win synergies staring you in the face here. So for example, and I talked about Teams earlier, so I said I would come back to it. So here we are. If you have Microsoft 365, Office 365 licenses, it is quite conceivable that you're actually paying for 2 phone systems but only using one of them. So if you've got Microsoft Office 365 and you've got on-site PBXs, or you may be using some kind of cloud-based IP telephony platform, well, just think about that, because actually with Teams, you've got a phone system. Depending on your license, you might already actually be paying for it. And that means that all of your internal calls could be completely free of charge across your own network or the internet. So you're not going to be paying for those IP-based calls at all. So that's definitely a cost saving around calls if you're using them internally in your network, but also around support costs and licensing costs on the other telephony platforms that you're potentially paying for. And actually, if you've got Teams now, you can actually also connect it to the PSTN, so you can use it as your entire phone system. You can do that with Microsoft directly, but you can also do it now with organizations like GCI. So we have interconnects between Teams and the PSTN, and that means that we can provide all of the voice minutes as well. And organizations like GCI can provide much, much lower call costs than Microsoft do. Just to give you an example, Microsoft standard charges for calls to UK Mobile is about 12.5 pence a minute. In the market, from people like GCI, you might normally expect to pay somewhere around 3.5 pence a minute. So use Teams, leverage it if you can, consider using it as your main telephone system and access those much lower call costs. Another thing to think about where you might actually be paying for the same thing multiple times and almost doing a bank style mis-selling job on yourself. I mean, there was all the huge stories of banks getting us to pay for premium bank accounts with bundled in services that we didn't need because we were already paying for a similar service somewhere else, already had it. Well, there is a risk here that you might be doing something similar yourself. So again, things like Office 365 come with lots of other services built within them. So things like security technology, for example, are you paying for security services and also licensing Office 365, which might actually provide the same sort of service capability for you? Don't pay for it twice. Similarly, things like multi-factor authentication. Again, Microsoft tools have it bundled in, you can use it for free, but lots of organizations are still paying for third-party multi-factor authentication platforms. So, just look at that and consider whether you're paying for the same thing twice. And again, back to voice minute deals, play hardball with your minutes provider. You don't have to adopt the Teams stuff to do this, but there are great deals available on voice minutes, and it's a place where you might actually be incurring much greater cost than you need to. So push hard on that. Number 6, get control of your shadow IT costs. Almost all businesses have shadow IT. And what do I mean by that? I mean costs that you're incurring outside of your main IT budget. And how does that happen? Well, it happens through things like expenses, business credit cards that are not within the site of IT, but are buying IT services. So, particularly with things like public cloud services, so Azure, AWS, G Cloud, these kinds of things, they're fantastic. You can spin them up when you need them, but are people spinning up services that they don't really need, that's outside of your visibility? Well, you can get control of that. And one of the ways you could do it, a simple way, is get the exec to back you, mandate it to the business that, we're just not going to tolerate shadow IT purchases at the moment. If you don't control it, it will definitely grow and get a life of its own. And it's not just public cloud things, it could be other things. I know myself, I subscribe to things like PDF editor packages from Adobe. That doesn't go through our IT purchasing, I expense it. And I probably shouldn't, or at least there should be some visibility and control around that. So also consider getting finance involved. Actually, it's probably the best way to stop this kind of activity. If finance didn't refund my expenses for Adobe PDF editor, guess what? I probably wouldn't subscribe to it on my credit card and expense it. There are tools available that can help you to control shadow IT spend and get better visibility of it, and experts who can provide you advice on that, and GCI, NASDAQ can do that for you as well. Number 7, benchmark your IT support model and the costs. You might be able to do it more cheaply. Now, this is true whether you use your in-house resources at the moment, or whether you're outsourced in full or in part. Review your model and look whether there are ways of delivering the same service more cheaply. And actually, you should do that even if you are in a contract with a provider. Review the terms, including any early termination penalties you might have, and benchmark it against alternatives. But I would really recommend that you do that in a very real way and create an active negotiation position, as I call it, with the suppliers. Because when the suppliers try hardest to give you the best deal, it's actually not when you're just doing a contractual benchmark. It's when you go to market with a service and create that competitive tension between the existing providers and others, and give people the very real opportunity to win your business. And even if you're in a contract and you're locked in and you've got termination penalties, as long as you didn't sign that contract last week for 5 years, then you can still potentially make the economics work. You might even find that an incoming provider is prepared to absorb the cost of getting you out of your existing contract. So it's an area to consider and look at, and there could be some very significant savings available to you through that sort of activity. Whether you want to do that or not, look at the ways in which you're currently using automation to provide support to your user base. Make sure you're automating that as much as possible. So there are lots of tools out there now, like Autopilot, SCCM, Intune, which can really automate lots of your support processes, taking people out of them, even helping users to self-serve lots of support. And the more they can self-serve, well, A, the quicker they're back being productive again, and B, the less time of support engineers need to be taking up providing support. So look at automation seriously. And if you aren't able to do that, or your current provider can't, then consider again whether you've got the right setup and is it optimal for you, because if you can automate it, it undoubtedly will save you money. And finally, on this point about the way in which you deliver IT support, there are different ways of approaching IT support. You can take flexible IT support models from lots of providers, and that means a little bit like paying for your software as you go, you can pay for your IT support as you go. So rather than having, for example, a team of full-time employees in the business or a full managed service outsourcer, you can dip in and out and call off resource when you need it from some providers, and that actually might definitely be an interesting way of delivering services more cost effectively right now, but also you might find that it's functional for the long term for you as well at a much lower cost point. Number 8, review your application environment. One of the things to look at, and this is easy or not depending on the nature of the applications, but are you running bespoke applications? Because if you are, by and large, it's quite an expensive way to operate. You've got development costs, special support costs, these sorts of things. You might want to look at whether there are off-the-shelf applications which could do a similar or the same job for you at a cheaper cost point, particularly, definitely from a support and development perspective, where you're not going to be incurring anything like the costs you do in development and of bespoke systems. Another benefit of using off-the-shelf applications rather than things that are bespoke is that user adoption and training, particularly if you're in a kind of industry or a business which goes through a lot of staff churn, where you've got new joiners coming on, the adoption, the training requirements around standard applications is usually much less for obvious reasons. The new starters probably used the same thing somewhere else before and is much quicker to pick it up. So savings there as well. Another area to think about is public cloud use. If you are using public cloud or considering using it, don't just jump in with both feet. Do the due diligence to understand what the cost of running your workloads in the public cloud would be before you move to it. And if you are already using public cloud services, there are some quick things you can do to make the use of them lower cost for you. So number 1, establish archive policies, remove data that's no longer required. You're using less resource, therefore it's cheaper, and it will also help you with GDPR compliance as well. Another tip around public cloud usage, look at the kind of data you're storing. For some data types, particularly things which don't change very often and are accessed frequently, it might actually be cheaper to host them in private cloud services than public cloud services, and there could be some big savings there too. Again, in the public cloud area, just continuing on this point, one of the great things about public cloud is that you can turn things off when you don't need them, but people don't always do it. So take the time, look at what you're using. It might be as simple as shutting stuff down overnight or disabling certain processes that aren't when they're not in use, like test and development environments, for example. You can do this most effectively if you've got specialist tools or experts that can help with that, and we're one of those. But that whole public cloud thing is fantastic from flexibility, but misused, you can fairly quickly find it doesn't save you money, it costs you more. So get it right, and don't necessarily be a zealot around it either. Consider hybrid models, even on-premise services, are not necessarily the wrong answer. It could be sensible to consider a hybrid approach to cloud. So just to summarize, I think many of the points we've talked about, you could view them as short-term tactical activities that could help you reduce your cost base, now quickly when you need to to face this crisis, but quite a few of them will actually not only deliver in the short term, but could pay dividends ongoing, because almost compounding your savings, because they reduce your OPEX. And OPEX, obviously, you're going to enjoy that saving for the long term, not just here and now. And some of them could actually help you to transform your business model and make you much less location centric, and be much more flexible. Because it looks like the new norm is going to be much more ubiquitous home working for the long term. So being able to support and function in that kind of environment is going to be necessary, but also potentially a lot cheaper for you as well. In fact, some of today's papers are even talking about the right for home working to be enshrined in law. So getting things like remote support and the effective use of video conferencing that we talked about could be really important for the long term as well as now. And I think, adapting and adopting the mindset of a startup business, so scrutinizing every penny you spend and looking for lower cost ways to achieve the same outcomes, will help you thrive, actually, not only survive through this difficult period. And the watchwords, they'll definitely be agile, be flexible, and avoid unnecessary costs and stay in shape. So, you don't just deal with today's problems, but you're in good shape for tomorrow as well. So hopefully some of the ideas we've covered today will be helpful. If anyone is interested in exploring any of the ideas in more detail or arranging a call to discuss further, please do reach out. And thanks for joining us today. And I hope everybody's doing okay. And good luck with weathering the storm. Thanks for your time.